And on Capitol Hill today, the House votes on the alternative minimum tax relief bill. It aims to spare 25 million families from a tax hike this year, presumably, or with the pretense of not adding to the deficit. It also hits private equity firms with a $31 billion tax. Joining me now is the bill's architect, Congressman Charles Rangel, chair of the House Ways and Means Committee, and Republican Congresswoman Michele Bachmann, who serves on the House Financial Services Committee. I don't think these two people necessarily have the same feeling about it. Chairman Rangel, I know you'd like to do something more permanent. This is kind of the same patch that we have to go through every year, right? But you figure it's worth it just to do it temporarily.
It's not worth it. 25 million people will be hit with an unfair tax. But let me make it clear, I am not the architect of the alternative minimum tax. I'm the architect of trying to get rid of it. The president says we should abolish it, but to do this, we would have to borrow $1 trillion. So he's never brought a tax reform bill to the floor, and we have reported one out of the committee. But this is such an unfair tax, and everyone knows politically we're not going to let it hit. But the difference between Republicans and Democrats is that we believe that we shouldn't borrow $61 billion for a tax cut that shouldn't have been in place in the first place.
And no way just not to spend the money, just to somehow cut spending to that till you need to raise it somewhere else. Does that make sense to you, Congresswoman Bachmann?
You know, it really doesn't make sense at all to me, because what this presumes is that the size of government must continue to grow. We reject that notion. There is no reason for government to continue to grow. For about 40 years, the average amount of government revenue from the entire GDP has been 18.3%. Under Charlie Rangel's bill, government will grow to consume 24% of GDP. So we don't think that government needs to grow on automatic pilot.
There's just not one Republican, and I can't think of any Democrat that's willing to say that they're going to cut back spending $61 billion. Sure, you either going to raise.
Here's a Republican that will cut back spending. There's a lot of us.
I hope you're talking about the war, Michelle, because I'd be with you in a minute if we were cutting back money to stop this immoral war.
I'll be happy to search the entire budget to pull it back, and I think we need to, because we can't continue to consume greater and greater shares of GDP. This is government growth on steroids. This is supersizing American government growth. That's not the direction that the American people want us to go. They want us to cut taxes, not increase taxes, because this bill that we're going to vote on today is a permanent tax increase to give a one-year tax cut. That's a really bad deal for the American people.
Michelle, the President of the United States has constantly put this in his budgets coming forward. And so it'll be $1 trillion to get rid of it. And he says he wants us to get rid of it, but when we try to do it, he then says we're raising taxes. So he is, not this year, but every year after this, he's depending on the revenue in his budget, which he's put for this. And so you can't have it both ways.
Charlie, I have a plan, and under my plan, we repeal the alternative minimum tax altogether, because this is a tax that was originally meant to impact only 155 people. It's like the blob that ate New York City. It's grown to the point now where it impacts over 25 million people. We need to scrap this terrible tax. It was a terrible idea that Congress had in the first place. We scrap the tax. We continue the tax cuts that have fueled the growth in the economy since 2003, and then we offer the American people a choice. You either stay with the current system of credits and deductions, or you simplify the tax code and go with a simple flat tax. I'm a former federal tax litigation attorney. I've seen how devastating high taxes are on the middle class. And the truth be told, the bill that we're going to see today from Chairman Rangel will hurt the middle class, exactly when we shouldn't. Also, it wasn't mentioned that it has a tax increase on American energy production. That's the last thing we should do right now when Americans are paying over $4 a gallon. With all due respect, it's a terrible bill.
What if it's self-defeating in that regard, Chairman Rangel?
I agree that we never should have had the tax in the first place, but I think that you would agree, Michelle, that this tax, if collected, we will be collecting $61 billion.
That's right. $61 billion that the American people could keep in their pocket.
Where do you get the $61 billion? What we're trying to do.
We don't need to get the $61. That's the point. We can cut government spending by that amount. I'll tell you, I'm a first-termer, and there's one thing that I've seen here in my first term. It is so easy to spend other people's money. We waste money like the American people couldn't believe. It's shameless. We shouldn't be spending this money.
Michelle, you and I know that if we don't pay for it by raising taxes, by closing loopholes, and that's what we do in my bill, then we got to borrow the money as we often do.
No, we absolutely don't have to borrow the money. We absolutely don't. That's a false choice because we can choose to not spend that money.
Why?
We don't have to.
We need to bifurcate the discussion of AMT and spending, okay, and government spending. You have an issue about AMT. Is the AMT make sense? Does the concept of AMT initially make sense? And was its execution prudent? Well, I don't necessarily agree. The concept of the AMT was to make sure people paid their fair amount of tax.
Like
and
Michelle
to make sure they
said,
didn't have deductions that got high net worth, high income producers to pay very little tax. That was a concept that made sense. The problem with the AMT is that the implementation of it doesn't make sense. For example, why...
The problem was that we didn't adjust it for inflation.
No.
Why?
Let me ask you this question.
What? Go ahead.
Why, under the AMT, is state taxes, which is a material component of New York City residents, why is the AMT... Under the AMT, state income taxes and property taxes not an allowable deduction? That is clearly something that the taxpayer is actually paying to a government, but clearly what's happening there is there's a misallocation of taxes that taxpayer pays to a state relative to the federal government. What never made sense to me is, yes, there are certain deductions that should be disallowed to prevent people who are manipulating the tax system, who are generating high amounts of income and not paying their fair share of tax. But when you have an AMT tax that eliminates the ability of a taxpayer to deduct taxes they've actually paid, that makes absolutely no sense.
That's right. That's exactly right. And that's part of the problem with the AMT.
We were only talking about 159 people in 1969. And we certainly weren't talking about people that made $40,000 and $50,000. Now, we have to correct this. And, Michelle, you know that the president constantly puts this tax as though it's going to be collected, as though it's going to hit the middle-class people in his budget. If he doesn't want it, he should take it out of the budget.
The point is, we're the United States Congress. We created this monstrosity that has become a sweet darling of revenue to fund big government. We're the culprits who need to get rid of it. We have a chance today to end the alternative minimum tax. That's exactly what we should do. It was a bad idea, and it should go away.
But the reason more people are getting exposed to the AMT is because what happened is we made tax cuts of the regular tax system, and we left the AMT tax rates unchanged. So by definition, of course, more people are going to be exposed. And what happened is the people who are getting exposed to the AMT just didn't really enjoy the tax cuts in the regular tax system. That's why more people have gotten exposed to the AMT. And we're obfuscating the issue by saying, oh, well, you know, the exemption is not being inflation indexed. But it really comes down to the fact that we lowered the regular tax rate from 39% to 35%, but we kept the AMT taxes at the 26 and 28%. So by definition, when you do those calculations under the two tax systems, you're going to fall, more and more people are going to fall into the AMT. And once the tax cuts go away, you see those people that were affected by AMT fall out of AMT.
And it's so bad that in Minnesota, a special ed teacher married to a policeman falls under alternative minimum tax, which is the big supersized, supercharged tax system. That's why this is such a bad bill.
What's shocking is people who pay the standard deduction. People who take the standard deduction are getting exposed to AMT.
That's exactly right.
When the president enacted his 2001 dramatic tax cuts for the wealthy, he could have eliminated this AMT at the same time. That's what's really pushed people.
No, the wealthy didn't enjoy it because they paid the AMT.
The real point is this isn't about the president anymore. This is about the United States Congress and our opportunity and challenge to deal with the tax code. We can deal with it straight on and help the American people, middle class, by cutting taxes, not permanently raising them. That's what this bill does.
How can you say that the president has nothing to do with it when he puts this unfair tax cut, tax increase in his budget? The president has everything to do with it.
Let's cut taxes.
I reread it today. Chairman Rangel, I reread it. I didn't say you did the AMT. This new bill, you're the architect. I see why you're sensitive to it, though. Because that wasn't my bill. I didn't say that about the AMT. This new bill is you're the architect of. All right.
Okay,
All
sure.
right.
Well, that's what we say. We're not going to borrow the money this time.
I got
the
it.
new bill closes $61 billion
Just don't spend it.
of
Got it.
tax loopholes.
All right. Thank you.